that's a very good percentage of coverage that you have. But you see, I've no fear of the board being kept here in Australia in one sense, because the board we got now wouldn't give you 2 bob for the board now, all right? And any nong from overseas couldn't do any worse than this mob had done. But on saying that, Chair, I'm not letting that get in the way of my judgment. But what I am saying is that of the 2,800, did I leave out the chairman as well? Maybe I'll include him. Of the 2,800 Qantas and Jetstar pilots, if by some mistake this got through the Senate, this repeal, how many of your members could stand to lose their job through offshoring?
Well, I think it's very difficult to predict. This Qantas Sale Act section Part 3 doesn't refer specifically to a certain percentage of pilots being required to be based in Australia. We've already seen operations like Jet Connect set up, which is a New Zealand-based, essentially a labour hire company, which Qantas use to lower their costs on trans-Tasman routes. They're pilots and cabin crew based in New Zealand who operate exclusively across the Tasman.
So of the 5,000 job announcements, and it's not fair to you, Mr Safe, or you, Captain McCarris, but we've been asking questions of Qantas Friday in another Senate inquiry, that we couldn't find out where the 5,000 were coming from. I think Qantas, through Mr Joyce, identified a number, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's about 1,500, I think, at the most. So have you been informed through Qantas that any of your members will be part of the 5,000 that go?
Sorry,
I know there'll be natural attrition when old aircraft's retired, and that may be, but...
The short answer to the question is no. The longer answer is we have had some dialogue since the 5,000 jobs were announced, and there's no firm, there's been no indication of a firm intention to make any pilots redundant so far. We have managed fairly cooperatively over the last 5 or 6 years to manage a surplus of pilots via a number of means, including some that I alluded to earlier, which is pilots going on leave without pay to work.
Which has been going on for quite a while
yes.
now, hasn't it?
Yes.
Okay, and I'm not familiar with your agreement, but if voluntary redundancies were asked to your members, do you think that there could be a possibility that Qantas could part-time their pilots? Or do you have that facility already?
We already, in our long-haul pilots mainline agreement, have provision for what we call flexi lines, which is part-time work. You nominate a certain number of hours to be worked in every 8-week roster period. We already have provisions for that. You can't be assigned to part-time work. You can't be forced to part-time work.
Sure. Yeah.
But a number of people who, for whatever reason it suits them, avail themselves of those.
Are there many of them, to the best of your knowledge?
No, I think it peaked in around 2008, 2009 at close to 100 pilots who took up flexi lines.
All right. Thank you, Chair. Look, I'd like to pass on the Senator to my left.
Sorry, Chair, before you go, can I just clarify a couple of things in relation to Senator Sterle's question about the 49% and a question we were discussing. In terms of the 49%, the 49% that's currently in the Sales Act exists side by side with the 49% in the Air Navigation Act, because the Air Navigation Act has a Qantas exclusion. What we're suggesting is that the Qantas Sale Act 49% can only be removed with exclusion, and that's part of that bill. So the 49% in the Air Navigation Act would cover Qantas anyway. So just to clarify that.
So it would protect what Australian jobs going offshore?
No, what I'm saying is the existing 49% that applies through the Sale Act would actually be covered under this repeal provision by the 49% limit that's in the Air Navigation Act. It wouldn't change that overall limit. What we were discussing about considering going past 49% foreign ownership in general is a much different problem, because that's where our air service agreements prevent it.
It doesn't propose that directly.
Yeah, so our air service requirements are most laws, sorry, there'd be 30 or so, I guess. The departmental officers will know better. But say there's in excess of 20 of them that are actually written in terms of minority foreign ownership for Australian designated airlines, and until that changes, as far as I understand, we're stuck with 49% anyway. Now, the only other thing I want to clarify for you, Chair, was simply that when we're talking about the existing provisions in the Air Navigation Act, one of the things that I am concerned about is the fact that in the guidance notes it talks about an airline having its operational base in Australia. It's not defined anywhere, so I don't know what that means.
I understood that to be what you were suggesting. You needed to tighten up to some degree.
Exactly,
Yes.
but I just wanted to clarify that the existing provisions
As it operates now.
are loose in that regard.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Now, Senator Gallagher, you had a clarificating question?
Just on this, you mentioned the Sales Act and the Air Navigation Act. So I've been trying to think about if this legislation were, by some miracle, to pass the Senate next week, and Qantas's market cap is 2.4, and someone out there with lots of money, deep pockets, decided to buy $2 billion worth of those shares, would they still be able to operate under the Air Navigation Act in their bilateral trade routes?
If a foreign entity bought
Absolutely.
in, so they were a majority owner?
Yes.
Oh, well, no, that wouldn't be allowed under the Air Navigation
That's all I
Act.
want to know.
Unless
Because we've
Qantas...
heard today that he has no plan
Yeah.
about separating Jetstar International or Qantas International, having separate entities. He just wants to get rid of the Act. Well, if we give him that, and someone buys Qantas tomorrow, they do not have exclusive rights under the Air Navigation Act.
No, but the point, I think the point needs to be made that Virgin has circumvented the limitation of the Air Navigation Act by splitting its operations, some would say a sham, I
And
believe.
their legal
Qantas-
counsel today said it would take them 2 months
Yep.
to replicate
Well,
it.
that process has already been begun and has been paused.
It took Virgin 2 months, Qantas says.
It would only take, it would only,
Senator Xenophon.
Two-way. So the
It'll be 3 minutes.
So Virgin, the listed entity still exists as one entity, but it's split, some would call it a sham, artificially, into an international division and a domestic division. I think the shares in the international division were priced at something like one millionth of a cent, and there's a contract that operates between the international and the domestic division, and that allows Virgin to build up the foreign ownership in the domestic division to anywhere up to 100%, because wholly domestic airlines can be 100% foreign owned, like Tiger was until it was purchased by Virgin, and then they restrict the ownership of the artificial international arm to 49% or less in order to access the air service agreements.
So the foreign ownership of Virgin is only 49%, is that what you're saying?
only of Virgin Australia International Holdings Proprietary Limited, or Limited, sorry. The ownership of Virgin Australia Holdings, which is the domestic arm, can go up to 100%.
The Air Navigation Act 49% limitation applies only to the international.
Yes.
Yeah, but, Senator Xenophon.
I'll be very quick. I need to put some questions on notice because I'm conscious of Senator Rhiannon's time as well. I should disclose, Chair, that Captain McKerris did some work for my office last year on the Pellerin inquiry on a casual contract basis, and I can say I think it was the worst paid job he's ever had ever since he was a student, a teenager. So I just want to put that on notice. Now, so you're saying, I just want some yes-no answers if I can get something on notice. So you're saying the underlying premise of this legislation is flawed because Qantas would need to restructure in order to operate internationally with majority foreign ownership?
No, because it's flawed from the perspective of if you only look at the 49% issue, but it's not flawed from the perspective of the 25%, the 35%.
No, I'm not asking about that. I'm asking about the majority foreign ownership. It's flawed in respect of that.
If the Qantas Sales Act was repealed, right, and they split the businesses and split the AOCs, then they could replicate the Virgin model.
Yeah, but Mr Joyce hasn't said that. He told Senator Gallagher he's not planning to do that. I'd like to get something from your notice, which I think is very important, and it relates to the open skies policy. I'd like you to put this on notice. What impact do you think open skies has had on the Australian aviation market? Have we been mugs as a nation by being open slather with respect to open skies compared to other countries?
Yes.
And yes, the answer is yes, but can you expand on that? Because I'm conscious of Senator Rhiannon's
Can I be a little bit more circumspect and say that's what the Productivity Commission should really look at? We'll put something back to you.
Can you put
that's
something
really
back to us fairly quickly? Thank you, Chair.
So I was actually going to about the thank you, Chair, about the Productivity Commission, because you've often spoken about it, and it's in your last paragraph in your submission of, well, one of the submissions that we have before us, where you actually suggest highlight the need for a broader Productivity Commission review. Do you think that needs to be undertaken before the changes to the Sale Act are considered? Would that be your preferred next step?
Yes, we do, because we say that the regulatory setting, the regulatory environment is the key contributor to why Qantas and Virgin as well, having lost proportionally more than Qantas, are in the situation that they're in. We think the framework is outdated. We don't expect that the 98 provision, if I could put it bluntly, basically said open skies is great, the consumer benefits, and that's fine. But we say that shouldn't be the only criterion by which the right policy settings are measured. We say that the PC should also look at what red tape burdens, what tax burdens, what depreciation burdens, how are we making life harder for Qantas and Virgin and all Australian airlines to compete with their overseas competitors? And the depreciation example is one of those.
Thank you. Just on another question, and it goes back to your comments when you were asked about the number of jobs that could go out of the 5,000 jobs that Mr Joyce has flagged to go. And you said that you have been in discussions about this and you've asked that question. If you're able to share it with us, and I hope you are, because often when we are questioning the Qantas management, it is hard to, on some issues, to get a clear answer. When you asked about the number of your members who could lose their jobs out of that 5,000, what answers were you given? How specific were they? What did they tell you?
We were given information that in terms of pilots, there hadn't yet been a determination made. There was an observation made that we still had a pilot surplus in the Qantas mainline business, in the region of around 10% of the total pilot body. But that, as I said, that's been the case for a number of years, and we have...
Figure fell out of the tree, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
We've got no idea.
That has been, if I can pick up on what Senator Still said, that has been, I think, certainly from an employee and employee representative's point of view, one of the most disappointing aspects of this announcement has been the headline figure was put out, but there's now thousands of employees who don't know if they're part of that equation. And I think a bit more detail around that announcement would have been very helpful.
And in those discussions, did they give you any indication when you would find out?
Well, we've been told that the 5,000 jobs will be phased out over a period of 3 years.
But I mean for your members, for
No.
pilots,
No.
so at the moment they have no idea when they will hear if they're going to lose their job.
That's correct.
So it must be, I mean, the levels of job feeling insecure about one's job must be quite intense when you have that hanging over you.
Well, it's far from ideal. I think everyone, to some degree, accepts that the airline industry is pretty tough. But as I said, the most disappointing element of the announcement was the lack of detail, and I think more clarity would have allowed people to plan their lives a little better.
And that lack of detail continues.
It does.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And thank you both for assisting us this evening. We will now break and resume work at 20 to 10. Thank you.